Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today we are going to talk in detail about some of the chemical reactions that make up cellular respiration. All right, so now we're going to talk about cellular respiration. We're going to talk about the actual multiple chemical reactions that make this reaction possible. So first, let's start, all right, by thinking about what cellular respiration is. The purpose of it is to take that stored chemical energy that we made in glucose that we made during photosynthesis and convert it into usable energy that a cell can use in the form of the molecule recharging ADP back into ATP. All right, and so today we're going to talk about that chemical reaction. Now, there's two different types of respiration. There's cellular respiration that happens in the presence of oxygen, and that's called aerobic respiration. And then there is cellular respiration that happens without oxygen. That's called anaerobic respiration. And so I'm going to actually make two videos here. First one talking about aerobic respiration, and then I'm going to spend some time, I'll make a separate one, supplemental one, talking about anaerobic respiration. All right, so we're going to focus on aerobic respiration, talking about in the presence of oxygen. All right. And even within that reaction, that subtype reaction, there's multiple reactions that happen here. All right. So, we got a lot to work. We got a lot to do here, a lot of big words, a lot of new words. All right. It's great about the videos. You can pause it, re-listen. I'm going to try and take my time. So things to pay attention for: what goes in, what goes out, the different reactions, what goes into each of those reactions, what goes out of those reactions, and where they take place. The whole goal in the end is to start with glucose and end with ATP. All right. So, like I said, we're going to start this video with aerobic respiration here. So let's start with what we have. We know that we have our mitochondria, and that is a primary location where a lot of this cellular respiration is going to take place, but we're going to actually get a little bit more clear on that. Not all of cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria because not all organisms have a mitochondria. Remember, all life needs usable energy to do anything, even if it's just a unicellular organism. In prokaryotes, bacteria, the most common form of life on this planet, doesn't have organelles like mitochondria. So they still have to be able to get energy. All right, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about anaerobic. But actually where we start, our first chemical reaction that we're going to be talking about here, actually takes place not in the mitochondria, but just outside the mitochondria, in the cytoplasm. All right, and so if we're going to be starting, with our first reactant here, the one that is most important. We have our glucose. All right, our C6. H12O6, right? That's that big molecule that's easy to move around and break chemical bonds, right, to get that stored chemical energy. And it is going in the cytoplasm, going to right outside the mitochondria, is going to have its first reaction. All right, it is a process called glycolysis. All right, it's going to happen just right outside here in the cytoplasm. All right, that's outside that cell membrane, or outside that mitochondria, where you're going to have glycolysis. I always want to spell glycolysis wrong, so I always have to double check. All right, so let me kind of briefly talk about it, and then we'll write the chemical reaction that happens here. All right, glycolysis is where this all begins. It's a chemical reaction. There are enzymes floating around in our cytoplasm. All right, they're going to find that glucose, and it's going to start performing this chemical reaction. So we kind of have going into this here glucose, and its first job is to just take this large molecule with 6 carbons and break it in half. We're going to break it in half into 2 smaller pieces. And it's no longer glucose at this point because now it has a smaller, different chemical formula. What it does is it breaks these 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, and it breaks it into 2 pieces. And that new piece that it makes is a chemical called pyruvate. Right? Pyruvate, which I'll spell out there in a moment. Right? It is basically 2 pyruvates together make make glucose. And so we've just broken in half. And now remember, when we break a chemical bond, we're releasing that stored chemical energy between those. Now we just broke basically 1 or 2 bonds to break that glucose in half. So we've released a little bit of energy. All right. So we're going to break that in glycolysis. We take glucose and we break it into 2 smaller pieces called pyruvates. All right. So let's go ahead and write our first chemical reaction over here. All right. Make sure I have enough space here. We have glycolysis. All right. This takes place in the cytoplasm. All right. That's our end glycolysis here. We're going to start with our glucose, our C6. H12O6. All right. And we're going to break it down into 2 pyruvates. Pyruvate. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to write the chemical formula, just to kind of keep it easy. All right. That pyruvate is made up of 3 carbons, but it actually makes, like I said, 2 of them. And when it does that, it also, because we broke it in half, we broke a chemical bond, it actually also recharges 2 ADP back into ATP. So we've recharged our first ATP. Now 2 is not a lot, all right? I know it's hard to say with the scale, like, do we need a lot of them? Like, 2 is not a lot. This is a pretty low outcome of energy that we need. So, all right, so now we have our 2 pyruvates. All right, they are going to now then go into our mitochondria. All right, and they're actually going to go into 2 different locations here. We have our mitochondria, or this pyruvate. The one that is going to happen, just want to make sure. One is going to go into a cycle here. So here's that pyruvate. All right, that's going inside that mitochondria. And then another one is going to happen that happens actually, so we have this outer membrane, and we have this inner membrane, and then there's this space in between here. That space inside that second membrane is something called the matrix. So we have 2 membranes. Right? And then we have this inside space, which is called the matrix. And this is going to happen, one of them is going to happen in the matrix, and one of them is going to happen on that inner membrane. Where's my blue? There we go. So I'm going to draw this one all the way over here. Here's a pyruvate. All right, so we have their 2 pyruvates here. They are going to leave there, and they are going to go into the mitochondria. One is going into the matrix, and one is going onto that cell, or onto that inner membrane there. All right, and so now we have our next set of reactions. We actually have 2 reactions happening at the same time in that mitochondria. All right, because we have 2 different pyruvates, and so 2 things are going to be happening here. All right, this first one. All right, let's talk about this one right here. All right, we have something happening called the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle. All right, which is taking place in the mitochondria. More specifically, it's happening in the matrix. All right, so it's happening in mitochondria. What happens is we take one of those pyruvates. All right. All right, so we're going to take one of those pyruvates and we are going to break it down. All right, we are going to break down that pyruvate and we end up creating carbon dioxide. All right, we're breaking down that 3 carbons into 3 different carbon dioxides. We create it into carbon dioxide, and whenever we start breaking things apart, we're releasing chemical energy, another 2 ATP. Right? Now, what it also does is it creates a couple different other molecules that you're going to need to do the second type of reaction in the mitochondria, and this is called the electron chain transport. All right? Or excuse me, the electron transport chain. All right? So we have the electron transport chain. All right, and it's also going to take place in that mitochondria, and it's going to use that other pyruvate. All right, it's going to take that other pyruvate, but in this case also, this second one also needs to happen in the presence of oxygen. If we have oxygen available, we can perform this second type or the second reaction. So I need to bring in oxygen here. All right, if I bring in oxygen, so this is that aerobic, right? Aerobic means with oxygen. Right? If I bring in that aerobic there, now I have pyruvate plus oxygen. And what that's going to do is that's going to break down that pyruvate, but now we have some extra oxygens as well. Right? We're going to be able to break that pyruvate into water. And water and 32 ATPs. We're going to recharge 32 ATPs. All right. So now we've got our our reactions here. We had glucose going to glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. And now we're ready to look at what happens overall. All right, kind of like we did last time here. All right, so if I'm looking at all my reactants and all my products, right? So let's look at this here, right? If I look at this here, I have my reactants. I start with glucose, all right, and then with the pyruvate, 2 pyruvates. But then I end up using those pyruvates right away, right? So these 2 ones that I just used, they cancel each other out in our final formula here. All right. And so I have my glucose, I use my pyruvates, all right? And what I end up with is glucose and oxygen on my reactants, and I end up with CO2, water, and a bunch of recharged ATPs on my products. So let's put this overall reaction together. All right, we start with glucose. All right, plus oxygen, because this is aerobic respiration. All right, make sure you guys can see that on my screen. All right, and we end up with carbon dioxide, water, and a bunch of ATP. total of 32, 34, a total of 36 net ATP. Because you do have to use a few ATP. It actually makes 38, but you need 2 of them to get some of these reactions going. And so we end up with our kind of our overall reaction here. Oh, but there's a problem with this reaction right now. I have to need to balance it real quick. I would have, so 6, 6, balance it out. So in the end, I have 1 glucose and 6 oxygen molecules creates 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, and 36 ATPs. So 36 ATPs per one glucose molecule. All right, that's a lot of ATP, especially when we're going to take a moment and compare it to aerobic or anaerobic respiration. So, kind of recapping here. All right, we have glucose in the cytoplasm. We have glycolysis that breaks that glucose into pyruvate. Then that pyruvate goes into the cell or into the mitochondria and performs the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain if it has oxygen. Right? And at the outcome of all of that, we have coming out of this one, we have carbon dioxide. Right? Carbon dioxide coming out of that reaction, and out of this reaction over here, we have water coming out. And of course, out of both of these here, we have coming out of them ATP. Out of this reaction here, we have ATP. And out of this reaction here, we have coming out ATP. We have a lot of places where ATP is being released out of all these reactions to come to our total reaction of glucose goes in with oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide, water, and ATPs. All right, I know this was definitely a long video. That's why I want to do 2 of them when we now start talking about anaerobic. So I'm going to leave it right there, and then you guys can start the second video. All right, see you in a little bit. Thank you very much. Good luck, and may the science be with you.